so when you're writing each exponential equation as a log, remember, the log and the exponential functions have the same what? So the base of the exponential function is the same as the base of the log. Okay, I also remember that it should equal the exponent. So they have the same base, and I always remember it equals the exponent. That's what helps me make sure I got those right. That is the second one, right? So the base, answer, exponent. So base is 10, answer should be 100,000, and then my exponent is 5. Right? Base, answer, exponent. And then also, those should be true. There's no other way that you could arrange these numbers to get a true statement, right? 3 to the 9th isn't 729. 729 to the 3rd isn't 9. Okay, so they do have to make sense as well. Questions for me on 1 through 6? 1 through 6 are good? All right, then let's look at the next section. So it says to write an equation for each. When I say that, all I want is the exponential function, just like we practiced today for our warm-up. So this would be, what's your base if you can't see it? 10. Okay, so if you can't see the base is 10. So this is 10 to some power equals a million. This would be 10 to a power equals 10. 10 to a power equals 1. Okay, that's your work. That's all you have to do. And then obviously you find your x value using mental math skills. Okay, 4 to what power is 16? 8 to what power is 1? 0, anything to the 0 power is 1. And then this was a fraction, so you want to ask yourself, okay, 5 to what power is 625? And remember we talked about, we know 5 cubed off the top of our heads, right? Yeah, so then if I want to find 5 to the 4th, just multiply that by 5. And guess what? It's 625. So that means this would be negative 4 instead of 4. So if it's a fraction, if it's 1 over it, okay? Questions for me on that? You guys feeling good about the log part? I'm optimistic for you about the log part. I feel like you guys are doing a good job at that. All right, now for 13, this is another one. You have to use what is given to you in the x values, graph that function and the inverse, make your table, write the inverse function, and then describe the domain and the range for each one. So when you are doing this with mental math, again, when you are plugging these in, if it's a negative, remember our rule. If you have 2 to the negative 2, make the reciprocal, and then you make this a positive. Okay, so that's how you get the 1/4. 2 to the negative 1 is 1 over 2. Okay, and then for the inverse, just switch your x and y. Don't try to evaluate. Pick the quickest path possible. Anytime you have an inverse, you should have y equals x on there. Some of you forgot that for these, so please add it in. And then the other thing I want to be very clear about that I see people kind of forgetting is we talked about this many times. When you have f of x equals, for example, 3 to the x power, what is the inverse? The inverse of an exponential function should always have what in it? A log. And then if the base here is 3, what's the base of the log? 3. And these need to be on the same line. Don't make it floaty like this, like where it looks like an exponent. No. Log base 3 of x. These should be together. That looks terrible too. Okay, so if you have f of x equals 1/4 to the x power, what's the inverse? Log base what? 1/4 of x. And they're all in the same line there. Okay, not an exponent. Okay, and then remember the exponential function should always approach what line? The exponential function is always approaching what? It's always approaching x. And really, I shouldn't label these beautiful things, right? Okay, so it's always approaching the x-axis. And then we also talked about yesterday, the inverse, the log function, is always approaching what? The y-axis. Okay, so your inverse is log base 2 of x. Don't forget this. Make sure you understand this. The domain for every exponential function is all real numbers. So when you do the inverse, that's going to be your range. Remember, these two switch. The domain should always be y is greater than 0 here, and then the domain is x is greater than 0. Okay, we've done that many, many times, and it's the same every single time. Yes, Ayla.
Why would the x be there if the x is the x? Sorry, the inverse equation.
So when you are doing the inverse equations with f of x and f inverse, the x is always your input, which is why we just use the log. Like instead of switching the x and the y.
Yeah.
I'll show you how to do that, like to solve for it. We'll do that next week. We just don't know, we don't have those solving skills yet. Yeah, Rashawn?
So is domain and range always all in one base and y?
For an exponential function, yes. And that means when you do the domain and range of the log, yes. For every single one that we have done, it is always that. Sam?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that same question.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's always all the numbers and y is greater than 0, which means this is always x is greater than 0, all real numbers. Yep. And then for this one, I filled out the f of x first. So 1/2 to the negative 3, because it's negative, you flip it. So it's 2 to the third, which is 8. So this is a negative, so you flip it. So it's 2 squared, which is 4. Okay? And then when you're graphing these, -3, 8, you want to keep in mind what it's approaching. At -2, we're at 4. At -1, we're at 2. At 0, we're at 1. And then as they start to get really, really small, do I really worry about plotting these exactly? No, what do I do? I do, but then what else? Because I don't want to stop it here. What do I do? Yeah, exactly. It just keeps going to the x-axis, just like that. Okay? And then for your inverse, you have 8, -3, 4, -2, 2, -1, 1, 0, 1/2, 1, and then again, those are just getting really, really close to what axis? Yes. So again, it just keeps on going. Okay, and then you also, anytime you graph the inverse, what do you also want on your graph? Y equals x, the line of reflection. All right, you guys got this? Okay, what's a good way to study for your test, do you think? Your quiz? Yeah, do some practice problems. One thing I would use to guide my practice is I would see which ones I didn't get correct, and then I would try to pick out some practice that's very similar. There's also some review pages you could do. And then I would absolutely use that checklist I gave you, and I would go through each point and make sure that I can do that without a calculator.